Welcome back to The Empire Never Ended. It's me, Boris, and I'm here with Ray.
Hi.
And today we're joined with a very special guest, Peter Korotaev. Peter runs the substack Events in Ukraine. We'll post the link in the episode description. And I've been following Peter's work, on Twitter for a while before the substack, when he was still living in Ukraine, and then, of course, following his dramatic escape when the war started. And among other things, Peter provides some of the best English language insight into the very complicated world of Ukrainian and Russian neo-Nazis and fascists, and kind of helps make sense of the tangled mess of their connections to the state and intelligence, oligarchs, organized crime. And we've been in correspondence for a while, so this has been a long time coming. And so welcome to the show, Peter.
Thanks so much, guys. I didn't know you were following me before that. That's cool, Boris.
Yeah.
I'm glad to be on this show. Great show. So thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So this, I guess this conversation can go in a lot of directions today, but I know that Ray has been particularly itching to pick your brain about O9A and O9A adjacent groups in Ukraine. So that might be a good...
Russia.
And so that might be a good place to start off for today, and then we can see where it goes from there.
Yeah. Like I said before we started the conversation with Ali Winston, we won't give much background about the Order of Nine Angles in general because it's a huge topic, and we talked about it since we started the podcast in 2021. We have many episodes on it, but the most recent one, when we gave some kind of a summary of all the things that we talked about throughout the years, if you want to listen to some basics about what is the Order of Nine Angles, what is the Temple of Blood, who is Joshua Sutter, and so on, you can listen to the episode we did in September about the Order of Nine Angles, which I think is episode 337.
Sounds right.
Sure. So, yeah, for the background on everything that we'll talk about now. So, Peter, on our podcast, we recently mentioned a murder that happened in Russia 20 years ago when, I think, a North Korean citizen was murdered, and it was recently solved. And I think this murder, if I'm not mistaken, was committed by a neo-Nazi group called Combat Terrorist Organization. And so when we corresponded, you mentioned how Russian neo-Nazis in the 90s and 2000s started calling themselves cleansers of the streets, and they started killing basically hundreds of migrants. And you also pointed out that there was in the late 2000s and early 2010s, there was a moment when neo-Nazis in Russia and Ukraine began pivoting more towards killing what they call social migrants, especially homeless people, not just migrants, social marginals, sorry. And they themselves call this tendency people hate. And I think that you told me, or you wrote in one of your texts, that in your opinion, this kind of generalized misanthropy among the Russian neo-Nazis really set the context in which some of them were ready to adopt, the ideas coming out of the Order of Nine Angles and such.
Basically, in the 2000s, when the Russian neo-Nazi movement was really developing and becoming a very powerful force in Russia and killing up to hundreds of people a year, the sort of difference between that and what it later became after the 2010s, when it was that in the 2000s, they had a fairly clear political program. When they were murdering migrants, this was part of a broader strategy to try and get the majority of Russians on their side, and obviously to sort of come to power in some sort of way in Russia through some kind of means, but counting on the support of ordinary Russians because of widespread anti-migrant sentiment. This was tied with commercial disputes as well between Russian and Azeri or Chechen, basically vendors at different marketplaces, competition over these spaces, and just, general different conflicts between Russians and migrant populations. They would often portray their murders as reacting to the, supposed or real violence by migrants against Russians and so on. And they also had connections with different influential Russian political figures. One of the most important, probably maybe the most important neo-Nazi organization in 2000s was called the National Socialist Order. Mm-hmm. But it was responsible for dozens of murders, particularly around 2007, 2008. And it actually, and then one of the main figures in it would later, he's now in Ukraine. He's a pretty important figure in Ukraine and in the Ukrainian army. His name is Sergei Korotkov. Anyway, but he was involved with that. But the other leader of the NSO was Dmitry Rumyantsev. Rumyantsev was an aide to basically senators in the Russian Duma, including a senator from the Zhirinovsky's party and so on. So these were pretty well-connected figures. Rumyantsev, for instance, he was taken to court for the murders, but he was never charged. He went free. But the other members of the group were charged and sentenced, but he went free. So they were part of a sort of general, I guess, strategy of Russian white nationalist forces. And then what sort of changed, in my opinion, is that in 2011, and then especially in 2014, around this period of the late 2000s and early 2010s, the Russian right wing, they started as well coming into an alliance with the Russian liberals as well, at least trying to. And so many of them, they went to the 2011 protests as well of Bolotnaya Square. And then there was also the case of Navalny, the Russian liberal guy, and he would go to the Russian marches. This was like this Russian neo-Nazi event. Anyway, and then as a result, and then also, of course, because of the support that many Russian neo-Nazis had for the Euromaidan in 2014, the Russian government really came down on them and really imprisoned a lot of them. You had Tesak, the really kind of the most famous Russian neo-Nazi, Maxim Marcinkiewicz. He was arrested in 2014 and eventually died in prison. And it was kind of an important moment because earlier, Tesak had actually been on government television quite a lot in the 2000s. And he was kind of he had sort of political chances. But then by the 2010s, they really got marginalized from the political scene and started really getting, arrested and so on. Some would die in prison. And then I think after that, you can really see that they really kind of give up on society as a whole, I guess, they don't really see there's any point in trying to appeal to ordinary, sentiment. And so I think and then they become very sort of, I guess you can say, anti-society in this way. You can call it anti-Russian. It's probably not entirely correct, but they just think that their society is kind of unsalvageable, essentially. And another thing as well is just that it's easier to kill homeless people than to kill migrants. Migrants would fight back. That was another factor, I think.
Yeah.
And then I think there's the final sort of factor that I would say is that there's just this kind of ambient middle class Russian Ukrainian sentiment of this hatred of the bydla. I don't know how you guys have it in your countries in the Balkans, but in Russia there's this word bydla. It means cattle, but it's very often used by liberal people to refer essentially to the working classes or lumpen majority population, essentially, and they're blamed for voting for Putin and so on, because they're uneducated and they want a communist strongman. That's the idea. And then you see with lots of these sort of neo-Nazi type guys, they also have this big hatred for bydla, and they call it the biomass as well. That's how they call all of society. And that's really sort of when in the 2010s, when you really have this people hate and misanthropic tendency where you read these neo-Nazi writings and so on, and they're always talking about how all of society is just this unsalvageable bio-waste, biomatter that needs to be, and it all needs to be cleansed. And we can start with the homeless and the drug addicts and so on, but in general, it's kind of a broken society. So I guess that's how I'd sort of narrate that.
That's very interesting. So you think that this kind of generalized misanthropy turn among the Russian neo-Nazis happened in the context of their kind of alliance with the liberals, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the biographies of so we're going to be talking about the Russian Volunteer Corps, for instance, the RD. Okay. If you look at the biographies of these people like Kirill Kanakian, also Vasil Kiroshenko, who's right now, he's the main ideologue of the RDK, and he's actually, we can talk about him later, he's a really fascinating guy. I'm going to be writing an article about him maybe today. But both of these figures are very important in the RDK, this Russian neo-Nazi organization which fights for Ukraine. But both of them took part in the protests, the Bolotnaya Square protest 2011, also the protests about the killing of Nemtsov. I don't know if you remember this event. Yeah. So, Kanakhin was actually arrested during the memorial march for Boris Nemtsov in 2015. Wow. He was sentenced to eight days in jail. And that's kind of one of the factors that led him to leave Russia. Yeah, I mean, like, if you look at these, like, people in the RDK, for instance, lots of them actually are actors. For instance, like Kanakhin and Tymoshenko.
RDK is the Russian Volunteer Corps. Which is a Russian, like ethnic Russian paramilitary fighting on the Ukrainian side of the war.
Yeah,
and neo-Nazis.
Yeah, they're very, and lots of the people there, they're actors from Moscow. I mean, the top figures, at least. Kanakhin and Tymoshenko, they're both actors from Moscow, from very privileged backgrounds, very, very privileged backgrounds, actually, especially Tymoshenko. So they're kind of the classic social basis, of sort of liberal, anti-Putin kind of opposition in many respects, and lots of overlap in that. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't just. Obviously, the liberals weren't only allying with neo-Nazis. I mean, they were trying to ally with lots of different forces. They're trying to ally with the communists, even in the early 2000s, and
also Nazis, no?
With Nazis. I was about to say that as well. Exactly. You have like with Garry Kasparov posing with Limonov and so on. So I mean, like, there was lots of that. But I mean, yeah, essentially in the early 2000s, there were definitely, throughout the 2000s, there was the idea that it's possible to sort of manipulate these street skinheads by the Russian government, and they can be like a controllable force, right? And there's lots of evidence about this and so on. But at a certain point, they became out of control. I think there was also just too much killing going on. I think that wasn't really desired necessarily, or who knows. Right. But I think the big problem, of course, was that they were allying with these very anti-government forces, and then of course when so many of them fought for Ukraine in 2014, that was definitely a big last straw. But already before that, there was this whole liberal thing going on. So yeah.
Okay, so we'll go more into talking about Kanakhin, who you just mentioned. But just before that, I wanted to ask you something else. So some years ago, when we were researching the Order of Nine Angles cell in Montenegro, the ABG Lodge, we found out about this Order of Nine Angles kind of inspired novel called Kiss of Marena.
Yes.
And which was published by Joshua Sutter's FBI-funded Martinet Press. And we also noticed when we read the editions of Fenrir, which is the Order of Nine Angles journal, which was edited by, there was like a Slavic edition of it, edited by these people from Montenegro. And then they would mention this novel and also its authors, which they explained was an Nexion or cell of the Order of Nine Angles in Russia called the Temple of the Black Sun. And we did a whole episode on that novel at that time.
Terrible novel.
And we were kind of skeptical about whether the authors are actually Russians, because it sounded to us that it maybe was actually written by these people from Montenegro. We were kind of not sure if it's an actual group or invented one, because you're never sure with your Order of Nine Angles. But then you actually, through your research, confirmed that the Temple of the Black Sun is a real thing. So in Russia, can you tell us more about that, and what is this novel, Kiss of Marena?
Yeah, so I mean, start with Kiss of Marena. I don't know which language you guys read it in, but I've had So the English translation is very bad. I just read the first couple of pages, and it was translated by the Montenegrin or something. But basically these ABG guys. You can tell it's a broken English. And I read the Russian edition, and it's a quite well written Russian thing. So
Nicola made it worse.
He made it a lot worse. It was kind of unreadable in the English, I thought, and in the Russian, because I mean I've read, unfortunately, some O9A fiction in English that's written by actual English language, and I found it very bad.
Yeah.
I've read some of the the Maya sort of stuff, and I found it really annoying.
Yeah.
But I thought The Kiss of Marena, obviously it's a very bad book, but in terms of the writing style, it wasn't that bad. It wasn't that overwrought. I found there was kind of stories, some things happen, and the writing style was fine, I thought. So yeah, it was definitely written by someone by Russian people.
Hmm.
And so in terms of the Temple of the Black Sun, there are only 2 mentions of it in Marina, and then on Kirill Konakhin's Telegram. So this link was not first made by me. This was first made by this Russian journalist, Maxim Solopov, who's a anti-fascist journalist. He used to write for Meduza, which is but now he writes for Izvestia. It's a Russian kind of government-owned journalist thing, but he puts out lots of interesting stuff about O9A. So he found that Kirill Konakhin mentioned Temple of Black Sun twice, both times in 2019. And Konakhin, I mean, I've translated the Konakhin messages about this in particular, but one of the messages was basically Konakhin, he shared a video of him reading poetry in 2012 in the Kola Peninsula, which is in the far north part of Russia near Finland. And that's also where lots of the events of Marina take place, all kind of ritual, blah, blah, blah. The poem is also kind of about children rising up and mass murdering all of society, essentially.
Well,
in kind of in a Kristallnacht type of thing. That's the term he uses. Anyway, it's kind of a little bit interesting if you think about manipulating kids to become school shooters, but that's it. But anyway, and then he has a post about this video, and in the video, it actually begins with a little mention of Temple of the Black Sun and pagan poetry front in this video. And Konakhin writes that Temple of the Black Sun is the name of the group of people in Moscow who practice the Order of Nine Angles, who for several years formed the main circle of my social life, basically. So he says that, and then in another post, a couple of months, the same month, this was April 2021, he said that O9A, he participated, he did not participate in rituals. He did participate in rituals several times, but he did not initiate himself, whatever the fuck that means.
He didn't play the star game, I guess.
Yeah. But he does say that he spent several years with them. So, I mean, in terms of when Temple of the Black Sun emerged, Solopov, he found basically the artist who made the artwork for Temple of the Black Sun in Russia, in Moscow, and he interviewed her and so on. Because also Konakhin posts her artwork on his Telegram, and then in the Marina book, there also uses her artwork. He talked with her, and she says this section. I just saw this today. I kind of forgot about this. I didn't really write about this, but I think you guys would find this interesting. Which is that she says that she was in contact with Richard Malta in the early 2010s. She tried to invite him to the Kola Peninsula, but he didn't come, and he stopped replying to her eventually. And then Solopov, he ties this to the fact that Molt, he published some kind of thing in 2009 about the new generation of the O9A in terms of attracting international members. I'm sure you guys know more about that than I do, but
very interesting though.
So yeah, that's a pretty interesting thing. So it seems, and judging from the fact that Konakhin said that in 2012 the O9A was the main circle of mine for several years, the Temple of the Black Sun, this kind of seems to indicate that it existed since about 2010. And it was in Moscow. That's where Konakhin was. That's where this other lady was. And that's also, so it was, and, this lady that did the artwork, she works at some kind of occult tarot store in Moscow. So, and Konakhin is an actor. And so you can tell the sort of social makeup of these people. It's kind of these upper middle class Moscow creative intelligentsia type of thing. Yeah, and then the last thing to say, I guess, is that also Konakhin, he posts photographs. There's the cover of the American edition of Kiss of Marina has these stones arranged. I don't know if you guys remember, but it's basically it's a photograph of these stones arranged in some kind of mystical, ritualistic way or whatever. And Konakhin posted this photograph when he talks about it and so on. It was also in the Russian edition, but it just wasn't the cover. So that's the sort of Temple of Black Sun Konakhin connection. Yeah,
interesting. So you mentioned now Konakhin, Kirill Konakhin a few times, but can you just tell us who is he and what is his role in the Russian Volunteer Corps?
Yeah, so Kanakian, he's based, so the Russian Volunteer Corps, essentially, it was created in 2022, late 2022, on the basis of largely on the basis of the Kiev Territorial Defense Battalion,
Mhm.
which was Azov guys. It was a pretty small group of people that were fighting in Kiev in, basically February, March 2022, when the invasion first began. And this was Kanakian and the other RDK guys, so Kapustin, these guys, and so on. And then the main intelligence directorate, Ukraine's military intelligence, they set up the RDK in late 2022. And then it was most famous for its incursions into southern Russian territory in 2023, early 2023, into the Bryansk region and Belgorod region. There's kind of some small raids. It's a pretty small, like numerically, it's very small. It's probably at most a couple of hundred people, but it's incredibly publicized. All of the top figures of the RDK, they're constantly being interviewed by Ukraine's biggest media, by Ukraine's biggest Western-funded liberal media as well, and then also by Ukrainian government media. They're really making them into these huge heroes. The head of military intelligence, Budanov, who's now, well, he was formerly head of military intelligence. Now he's the head of the presidential administration. So he's kind of, in a sense, kind of the most powerful official in the country after the president. He often, appears publicly with the head of the RDK, Kapustin. So it's a very, very mediatized unit. And they're also sending a delegation to the PACE, which is basically this EU organ created for dialogue with the Russian opposition in exile. So basically, they're pushing. This is the big thing we can talk about later if you want, but they're pushing themselves to be the main representative of anti-Putin forces in the world. That's another topic we can talk about. But anyway, but Kanakian, he was in the RDK from the beginning. He took part in these raids on southern Russian territory. It's unclear what he really does. He claims to, be involved with their mortar. It was originally kind of a mortar unit, technically. That's what it did, apparently. And he claims to do something with mortars. But in terms of his life, it's a very amusing life, honestly. So he's from Moscow. He was an actor. So I mean,
like a stage actor or like a film actor?
Look, I can tell you about this. It's honestly hilarious. So I mean, from 2004 to 2006, he had minor roles in the series Delusion, 9 Months, and Airport 2. In 2006, he received a significant supporting role in the film Nobody Knows About Sex. The film was a success with audiences, and Kanakin's character, Kesha, was considered one of the most memorable, which soon led to a shooting of the sequel called Nobody Knows About Sex 2, No Sex. So yeah, that's kind of, he was in lots of movies, and I actually had this article that I forgot to put out, and I just rediscovered it today, so I'm going to try and put it out today. And I just found lots of photographs of him from his different movies, and he used to be kind of fat and pudgy, kind of like a cute little kid. But then apparently, so there's a Wikipedia page about him in Russian, and it's edited. And if you look at the editor of the page, it's this guy Bonin, who's obsessed with serial killers. He's edited 300 Wikipedia pages about serial killers, and he has very personal feelings and comments about these different serial killers. And then he's also the main guy in charge of Kanakin's Wikipedia page. But apparently after 2012, Kanakin got really obsessed with yoga and Eastern mysticism. But he was already like a neo-Nazi before that, because he was, he was already participating in different oppositional stuff. But in 2012, he got really into yoga. He got covered with tattoos and became really skinny. I think he did lots of fasting. Got really, and that really kind of freaked out his film colleagues. But he blamed corruption for this, and he said that he was being repressed for his political views or whatever. But he continued acting in films. But he was opposed to the annexation of Crimea. He took part in protests against it in Moscow. Yeah, and then, as I said, he was arrested for the Nemtsov rally. Nemtsov was this really famous Russian liberal who was assassinated in 2015. And so And then he was, and then he moved to St. Petersburg, and he worked as a private yoga instructor, and that was kind of his main job for the next few years. And then he also went to India quite a lot, and he met up with some kind of weird guys there, these kind of gurus and so on. He posted a lot about that on Instagram, and he became more and more broke, and then eventually in 2018, a criminal case was opened against him for protest activities in Russia, and he went to Ukraine and joined Azov. But I mean, joined Azov as in he became their yoga instructor. So like so in 2018, 2021, you can see lots of Instagram content of him doing yoga classes covered with his huge black sun tattoo. He's got like a giant black sun. And he's got a huge amount of tattoos and other mixed in with all kinds of, Hindu type of, stuff. But he was the yoga instructor at the Cossack House in Kiev, which is the main kind of Azov event center, I suppose. But he was last seen in Russia in 2021. So he would still return to Russia, which is kind of interesting. This is, in mid 2021. So only, like 6-7 months before the invasion. Right? But yeah, that's the story of him. It's a pretty hilarious story, honestly.
There is a new book by Stuart Home called Fascist Yoga. It's about the relationship between yoga and fascism, which is a very old connection. If people are interested in that, it's not some new development. And we also mentioned yoga when we had an episode about the Nuncio's excursion to Rijeka. There was also some yoga fascists there. So it's a very, very old thing, basically from the start of fascism. It existed, this connection. So Kanakin and the Temple of Sun have this kind of special relationship with the Kola Peninsula, which you mentioned already. What is that about? Boris did a few episodes on like Russian and Ukrainian neo-pagan fascists, and also I know from my own reading of Dugin that all of them, a lot of these Russian and Ukrainian fascists have like this kind of some kind of obsession with Hyperborea and this idea of like an Arctic homeland. Is that the reason why they are interested in the Kola Peninsula?
Absolutely. I think it's, in Kiss of Marina, they say this explicitly, where it's like, this could be where Hyperborea was. There's a line saying that in Kiss of Marina. In Kiss of Marina, he's told to go there by his knife instructor, that, the guy that basically tells him you need to become a serial killer in the name of, I don't know, esoteric Hitlerism or whatever. And you need to go to the Kola Peninsula to do crazy magic stuff, which he does. And he, I don't know, like there's some kind of big kind of white light type of thing. Anyway, but he talks about Hyperborea there. So I think it's just purely aesthetic, essentially. I don't think there's much more to it than that, really. They're just really into it.
I guess it's accessible from St. Petersburg. It's not super far out there, I guess. I don't know. Like
it's pretty far.
Russia's
huge, I went to the Kola Peninsula. I kind of forgot. When I was very young, I visited my family that were at the time still living in Russia. And we went on a trip up to the White Sea. Which, I don't know if that's exactly, but it's basically quite far north of St. Petersburg. It's serious thing to get out there, but it's an incredible landscape. It's very, very remote, and it's you really feel like you're at the end of the world out there. You have these huge lakes, these islands in the middle of them, surrounded, and the lakes are like oceans. So they're so big. Just all this flat land, these mountains rising out of nowhere. Pretty incredible place. So I can understand why you would be really into the Kola Peninsula.
Okay. I read somewhere, I don't know if it was in your text or somewhere else. So the Rusic, which is this Russian and pro-Russian neo-Nazi paramilitary, they're also based in that area right now.
Well, Rusic so to begin with, Rusic is definitely, they're into O9A stuff.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, no, this is not. Yeah, they had. A couple of months ago, not that long ago at all, they had a post calling to execute prisoners of war. They often do this. This is one of their favorite sort of topics. And they posted a photograph of a Ukrainian prisoner of war that they had killed, or someone else had killed, or whatever. And the subtitle was "Glory to Morena."
Oh wow!
So and technically, according to the whatever, who knows who actually, but Morena is meant to be this Slavic goddess of death.
Yeah.
That's the idea. And it's this classic O9A thing. I mean, from what I can tell, reading O9A stuff, they're always really into these feminine, goddesses of death. That's their kind of big obsession. I don't know what's going on there, psychosexually, whatever, but they're really into that. And so yeah, I mean, like that. And then in terms of the Kola Peninsula, so yeah, they seem. I mean, I think originally this story came about. It's honestly unclear what Rusich does. Like that's always kind of an unclear topic. It's a very, like the RDK. This is a very small unit. This, at most a few hundred, probably a lot less, probably more like a few dozen people or something. And it's more like special ops type of thing, similar to RDK. But they do definitely have some influence through alliances with different kind of influential figures in Russia. But in 2023, they declared that they were leaving the front line because they were angry. This was after the Prigozhin uprising, and they supported the Prigozhin, and they were just angry with the Russian army for, like, I don't know, not giving them enough. Oh, no. It was this thing where they were angry because the Russian government didn't save their comrade that had been Jan. Remember this guy? He was arrested in Finland. He was a Rusich guy, Rusich neo-Nazi guy, and he was arrested in Finland, or Norway, no, Finland. And they've imprisoned him. And then Rusich wanted the Russian government to, I don't know, free him or something. And so they were like, we're leaving the front lines. We're going back home. And then they had some kind of thing where they were patrolling the border with Finland. But it's unclear. But now they mainly post, and they don't really post photos from Finland. They post photos of them. When they post war photos, it's in Ukraine. And so I think this news, because I know what you're talking about. It's on the Wikipedia page for crimes involving O9A, right? And it's kind of a bit of a funny Wikipedia page because it basically tries to tie all of the Eastern European O9A stuff. It's all Russia. And like obviously Rusich, which is a pro-Russian government thing. And I mean, Rusich is pro-O9A for sure. But I mean, if you're looking at it, it's just kind of crazy that they don't really talk about the RDK. Right, which is where you actually have people that are confirmed to have been involved in the original kind of spread of O9A ideas, and that really do popularize it quite a lot. And I mean, we can talk more about the different ideological platforms that the RDK has. They have, Wotan Jugend, which is this big kind of blogging platform that's been around for 2 decades now. And they're constantly, translating Brenton Tarrant's manifesto. They're translating Breivik stuff and all this kind of thing. And they're really propagandizing these ideas, and Satanism and so on, Nazi Satanism. Whereas Rusich tries to, obviously they are kind of, neo-Nazi, white nationalists and so on, but they can't really be, it's a bit more difficult for them to be openly pushing O9A stuff, which is illegal in Russia as of 2025.
Right.
To be fair, so. Yeah,
I mean, my understanding with Rusich, and I'm not sure how correct this is, but that it's basically more or less the same kind of milieu as the RDK, except they're the ones that stayed in Russia as opposed to, moved to Ukraine. And so they still have to play by the rules in Russia, whereas the guys in Ukraine can kind of have more freedom to do their own O9A stuff and other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, Rusich has a pretty complicated time. In general, to talk about the link with the Ukrainians, I mean, the leader of Rusich, Milchakov, he was best friends with Roman Zheleznov, who's another big Russian neo-Nazi, but who went to Ukraine in 2014. And they even did a live stream together in 2015 when they were both fighting each other in Donbass. But they still were like friends. Yeah. So, and not friends. But they were still had a civil discussion and so on.
Right.
So, these are all the exact same milieus, and really, like the Russian neo-Nazi scene, it really experienced a huge split in the 2014 period. And really, like I think in 2014, most Russian neo-Nazis either supported Ukraine or were kind of neutral about it, and then it sort of changed. And I think there's now more that are kind of. Yeah, I think they found more opportunities with Wagner and so on, and other similar units, and then in 2022 it sort of became more of a national kind of patriotic thing, I suppose. Anyway, but that's a bit of a different topic.
In 2024, Sutter did an interview on his Substack with with a guy who uses the pseudonym Hunter Herzog, and who presents himself as a kind of an expert on Germanic esotericism and mythology and such. And he's definitely like kind of more an intellectual type than usual people who collaborate with Joshua Sutter, I would say. And I have some idea who that might be, some black metal Order of Nine Angles guy from the 90s, but I still didn't confirm it. But they both, in that interview, talked about the war in Ukraine, and they both think that there's some almost kind of cosmic or some like significance to that war, because for the first time after thousands or whatever how many years, they're like there's a war that you have Viking warriors on both sides fighting each other, and which that guy really loves, and he says like neither of the sides in that war are completely right, but war is right. And this is how Odin operates, because he wants the best Viking warriors to fight each other, because he wants to gather the best warriors in Valhalla for himself when Ragnarok comes or something like that. And that guy also says that like he knows that there are like warriors on both Russian and Ukrainian side who see it the same way, and this is their motivation for going to the war. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I really think that that's exactly how they think. Often, I mean, Rusisch and stuff, that they're pretty clear about it. I mean, for them, they like war, and they're just warlords essentially. I mean, they like killing and so on, and the same with the RDK. I mean, the RDK sometimes they'll try to have some kind of. I mean, obviously, they both have different ideological ways of putting it. Probably not, but I mean, the interesting quote that I can tell you from. This is also from this guy, Solopov, this Russian journalist, and he found this O9A telegram that was recruiting people to fight in the war on the Russian side. And they said that fighting for any side was fine, because they said, quote, there should be no winners in Ukraine, only losers. If it comes down to it, we'll smash everyone and everything, regardless of the symbol, be it the idea of the nation, which is like Ukrainian nationalist symbol, or said, which is obviously Russian, and we don't care. The coming racial war is more important. So they sort of see it, kind of, it's a destabilizing force in kind of accelerating contradictions, kind of classic, right-wing accelerations perspective. But I mean, but on the other hand, the way that, say, like Ukrainian neo-Nazis fighting with Ukraine, because lots of them are actually Russian, obviously lots of Ukrainians as well. But the way they see it is they do think that there is, for them, Russia is a neo-Bolshevik country, as they call it, and what they mean by that basically is there are too many immigrants in Russia. And they think that they don't like how Putin is, tries to have this idea of multi-ethnic Russian nation, which is obviously not invented by Putin, but that's always kind of how a country the size of Russia is inevitably going to have to operate. It's going to, not fall apart. And you had similar almost things in the Russian Empire and obviously the Soviet Union. They can't be, overtly white nationalists. It's just not going to work in a country with as many different ethnic groups as Russia. Obviously, in reality and practice, it's not exactly like that. But still, I mean, and then I mean the RDK, they advocate radically shrinking the size of Russia, getting rid of the non-Russian ethnic parts of Russia. But so they see it as being this ideological struggle against this enemy in the Russian government. And I mean, there was an interesting thing in 2023 when the RDK did their raid into southern Russia, and Kapustin, the leader of the RDK, he put out this Telegram post. He's a very, very, very popular guy. He's got like 50,000 followers, a very popular guy in the Russian neo-Nazi scene. And he said, well, now, couch potatoes, the Rahowa has come, the racial holy war. And it's basically saying, like, if you're really serious about your beliefs and fighting the Russian state, which is killed, in the way they see it, which is kind of true, the Russian state has imprisoned and killed, dozens or hundreds of Russian nationalists, as they view it, right, over the past couple of decades. And so they see it as this matter of personal revenge as well, where you have like their biggest heroes, like, for instance, Tesak Marcinkiewicz. He was killed in Russian prison in 2020. And he's like the big martyr for them and so on. So they see it as, we need to do struggle with this government, and so. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it seems like the RDK has a little bit more of this kind of broader, bigger political pretensions than just, war for war's sake. Like, especially now with the kind of popularity that Kapustin has. I mean, he could really capitalize on that.
So before we move to a bit different topics, although connected to this, I just want to mention that in 2024, a Russian court convicted 4 Satanists for murders committed in, I guess, the region of the Kola Peninsula. So was this proven to be connected with the Temple of the Black Sun or of the Nine Angles?
There's no proof it's connected with the Temple of the Black Sun, but there was. I was looking at this just before, and so I mean, apparently, according to Russian media, these individuals considered themselves part of the Church of Darkness. I don't know if this rings any bells for you.
No.
I think it's just some kind of Russian thing, which, according to Russian media, is a branch of the O9A. And this killing started in 2016. So this would have been 2016. I mean, this was significantly after the publishing of Kissa Marina, which was 2013. And obviously, Konakhin was, in his words, no longer involved in the O9A, which, I mean, seems to be true because, I mean, he did just become really into Hinduism. And obviously, his version of Hinduism is basically O9A, but just Indian. Because, you read his Hinduist poetry and it's just all kind of, ritual murders, sacrificing to the female god of whatever darkness and so on. But I mean, he didn't seem to be hanging out with the old kind of his old Satanist guys, and now he was in India all the time. So anyway, but like my point just being that these killings happened in 2016, seem to be after Temple of Black Sun. And there's no evidence, but they claim that, according to Russian media, it was with O9A. They were inspired by O9A, which I think is possible. I don't think that's that unlikely. I mean, if you're going to be doing ritual murders, you have to have some kind of justification for that. And there is plenty of O9A literature in Russia. We can talk about that. There are these publishers, Ex Nordlux and Totenberg, which Konakhin is actually subscribed to. He's subscribed to Ex Nordlux. And they have, 20,000 subscribers in Russia.
Wow.
They publish, they have a lot of subscribers on VK. They publish books by Michael Serrano, by Leon Degrelle, also by Michael Aquino.
Oh, wow.
And but I mean, and then also, I mean, Solopov as well has found, this kind of a large market in Russia for ordering books by Sada's stuff like Liba 777, whatever the fuck it's called.
333.
333, yeah, thanks. I'm not so deeply familiar with that book.
That's okay. You shouldn't be.
No.
Yeah, I've so far managed to not have to read any of Sada's.
That's great. You shouldn't.
I'm planning to keep it that way. But so I mean, and there was a case of this guy, Semyon Chulkov, who was arrested in 2024 for basically sexually abusing a teenage girl over a period of time. And his social media, he was talking a lot about O9A stuff, about Liba, blah, blah, blah. I think his nickname was like Liba 333. Okay. His nickname on. So, I mean, and he was ordering that stuff, and he was talking as well about how he loves Azov and he loves Misanthropic Division, which is
and the Order of Nine Angles, right? He was open.
Yeah. So there are these people, these do exist. These ritual murders, they might have just been like Satanism in general, but I think it's quite possible they were O9A because, I mean,
or maybe they were just inspired by the Kiss of Marina as well.
Yeah, that's also possible. Exactly. I mean, I think, I mean, this Kiss of Marina seems to have more of like, you just kill them and that's it. There's no like torture or whatever. There's no dismemberment. But these people, they were like dismembering and eating the people.
Damn,
so it was a little bit different. But I mean, there were also some famous cannibalist murder things in the Yaroslav region of Russia a couple of years ago as well. I think you guys have heard of this.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy, actually. One of the main guy involved in that, and this was also some kind of cannibalism, dismemberment. He actually went to fight in the Russian army in Ukraine. So he was released from prison to do this. But then he became a cripple. Now he can't walk. So I guess it's some kind of justice there. I'm not really sure. It's hard to say. It's a complicated case. But
I was wondering, like, I heard that there was like this kind of in Russia that there was a Russian specific kind of Satanist thing being developed in prisons, like during the Soviet era. Do you know much about that? Are there any sources for anything like that to read? Or
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I don't know that much about the prison context because, I mean, honestly, one of the most influential figures for Russian neo-paganism was this guy. It's like Dobroslavsky.
Yeah.
He had a couple of different. That was his. Yeah, anyway, his name was Dobroslav. I think his full name was Dobroslavsky, something like that. But he was in the 90s. He was like this pagan guy, lived in the woods and did all this stuff. And actually, and one of the figures in RDK, what's his name? Alexei Lyovkin, who's in charge of the black metal National Socialist Band. He met with Dobroslavsky in the 2000s. So early 2000s. But like this wasn't really from prison culture. These were more, and you already had. There's actually a really interesting history as well of Satanists, like more like pagan beliefs, really pagan neo-Nazi beliefs in the Soviet Union. And this was beginning kind of in the 60s and 70s. You actually had the head of the Komsomol, was involved in publishing this essentially occult pagan militarist manifesto. There was some really influential figures in the Soviet elite. Some people call them like the Russian Party, that were very anti-Semitic and very and they would be they published academic work as well in the Soviet period about basically Hyperborea, this stuff already appearing, and the role of the Jews in sort of pushing Christianity onto the proud Russians and so on, this kind of stuff. So this was already circulating in kind of elite and intelligentsia circles in the 70s and 80s in Russia. Lots of it was kind of curated as well by intelligence agencies, obviously, but like it was simmering. I don't really know. I mean, there were some like small neo-Nazi militant groups of people that were like ex-cons, right? And these were very small groups. They were in the 50s and the 60s, and they would just throw up some stickers and so on, and they got instantly arrested and put back in jail. They weren't really influential because they didn't network and they didn't really leave anything behind them. But there were these more important networks that did have important elite access that were more,
Yeah, I mean, Slavic neo-paganism in general, like you said, in the 60s and 70s was a very elite thing. And it even going back before that, it has kind of proto-fascist connections, like, it was with white emigres, developed with white emigres and the like. It just has always had this very reactionary tendency to it.
Yeah.
Okay, so we talked about before and also recently about Denis Kapustin, White Rex, who recently rose from the dead. So do you want to comment maybe on that whole situation and tell us does he fit in this whole thing with Nazi Satanists and so on? What are his connections with those people as well?
So I mean, like in terms of Nazi Satanism, he hasn't really pronounced. I think he cares a bit less about ideological stuff than say.
Kapustin is the leader of the Russian Volunteer Corps.
Yeah. I mean, Kapustin lived lots of his life in Germany, but he was actually expelled there in 2019 for being a neo-Nazi and being like a violent football hooligan. So he can't actually go back to the EU, which is pretty ironic because now his organization is going to these EU Council of Europe events and so on, but whatever. And but Kapustin also, coincidentally, he was sent he got a visa from Russia to Germany as on the basis of him being from a Jewish family. So that's how he went there. And but he really rose to fame as being in charge of this white nationalist clothing merchandise network company called White Rex. And so people buy his clothes, and that's really how a lot of, I mean, I think it's all over the world, but like neo-Nazis are really, really into clothing merchandise in Ukraine and Russia, really, really into it. And so that's how he did that. And then also he set up different MMA clubs. I think you guys have talked about this stuff. Yeah. What's that guy, that annoying American guy, like Rondo?
Rob Rondo, yeah. Yeah, they had a podcast together.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And also the Australian guys, the Australian National Socialist Network, they're really
Yeah.
into
Mm-hmm.
Kapustin, and they're always praising him and so on. Recently as well. I don't know if you know that much about these guys, but they're kind of a rising force, I guess, in Australia.
Yeah.
But so yeah, and then Kapustin he came to Ukraine. In the I think he was in Ukraine a fair bit in
Mm-hmm.
the 2010s and so on. And then he became the leader of the RD. He was with Azov and so on, and he had photos with the leader of Azov, Bilyetsky, um, in the 2010s and so on. I mean, after the Euromaidan, obviously,
Hmm.
after 2014, and then when the RDK was set up, he became the leader of the RDK in 2022, and then he's really become kind of one probably their main public face. There are some other figures in there as well, but he's really the public face of it, and he's always being interviewed by like top Ukrainian media, uh, liberal media, like funded by Western, aid organizations, and also by Ukrainian kind of government media. So yeah, and then there was this case with his claimed assassination, which turned out
Right.
to be fake, which is a kind of a classic strategy in Ukraine, by the way, of like faked assassinations by the intelligence agencies,
Oh,
which are
okay,
then
so it's not
claimed.
a unique thing at all.
No,
Okay.
it happened. I mean, there was the famous case of Arkady Babchenko, which was like this Russian anti-Putin journalist that was announced to have been assassinated in Kiev. But then the next day, this was in 2016 or so, 2015.
Mm.
And then the next day, the Ukrainian intelligence agencies were like, no, we faked it to stop a real assassination, which is the same story as with what's his name right now.
Mm.
And then there were lots of other weird fake assassinations of like pro-Ukrainian people that were organized by the intelligence agencies, and they'd say we actually faked it. Then there were also some real cases of assassinated pro-Ukrainian, anti-Russian people in Ukraine
Mm.
that later it was emerged that the Ukrainian intelligence agencies were clearly involved in this. And anyway, that's a whole different topic of very strange events in Ukraine, essentially. Anyway, but like, so not Kanakian, sorry, Kapustin, they
Mm-hmm.
claimed he was assassinated, and then they're like, no, he's not. We staged it to prevent a real assassination, which is the classic explanation they always have for these kind of events, and we managed to stop the real assassination and blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, what's kind of interesting about this is that when he was supposedly killed, every single Ukrainian media were like, they made these big articles, rest in peace, Kapustin, biggest hero ever, and you'd have, I've seen it was like 30,000 likes, on these Instagram posts
Yeah.
about it, and it was the top media story, and everyone, people see his face, I guess, in the TV more and more, but no one really knows what he kind of did. I mean, it's not, he's just this figure that's kind of this cool anti-Putin, anti-Russian guy. He's got like a military unit and so on and so on. And they have really slick, videos of what they're doing in the war and so on. And they have really cool photos with their guns and blah, blah.
Even their
And
uniforms are kind of cool. You can tell he was into style. They have those
yeah,
like the patches look nice and
exactly.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, and they have lots of interviews. They got a big, like, YouTube channel. They have lots of interviews with their fighters, and they're talking about their war stories, and they're talking about, the comrades they've lost in battle, and their life stories. Like, they have lots of Wagner fighters that turned over to their side, and they have others like Russian soldiers that came to their sides. They have all these stories. It's very, very well produced, and so on. It's kind of a classic trait also of Azov affiliated stuff where it's very, very well produced. But RDK is probably the best produced. Like RDK has really become the most public facing kind of part of Azov, essentially. It's kind of fascinating. And I mean, it's really in charge of some of the leaders of RDK, Lyovkin, he's in charge of Azov's youth paramilitary, or at least he's in charge of the ideological lectures for Centuria, which is this youth paramilitary, which is, yeah, anyway, but whatever. But anyway, so just to finish up with Kapustin, it was this huge story. And then when his assassination was declared to have been fake, it was this huge euphoria, and everyone was saying on social media, it was like, oh, it's the second coming of Christ, because it was on the 1st of January or whenever it was, and it's the best news present ever, and everyone was so happy. And Kapustin announced his return from the dead in a Zoom call with Kirill Budanov, the head of the main intelligence director. And so it was a big hype moment for Budanov as well. And then the next day, basically, like 3 days later, Budanov was appointed as the head of the presidential administration, which is the most important official post in Ukraine. Historically, the head of the presidential administration has always been like the most powerful person in Ukraine. You had Yermak recently, who was kind of, people were saying was more powerful than Zelensky, essentially. Mm-hmm. But this is a thing with every single Ukrainian president. You always have this super powerful head of the administration. And then they made Budanov the head of the presidential administration. So I think you can kind of see some element in which this staged assassination was kind of just a media PR boosting event for Budanov to get people more and more happy and excited about him for this new and more important post.
Because they also claim that the RDK collected the ransom that the Russian government had out on Kapustin. Yeah. Did that actually happen? I mean, I don't understand how the logistics of that would work. I mean, how did it get paid out? Did they send crypto or something, or what? Like,
I mean, it probably would be crypto. I mean, Rusich is really into crypto, by the way. Actually, they give out like crypto awards for like killing prisoners of war or whatever. But anyway, but I mean. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of this thing when no one will ever know if this is true, and it sounds like bullshit. I mean, it sounds like bullshit. Yeah, but maybe they did. Who knows? I don't really care.
Fair enough. Yeah.
You mentioned Alexei Levkin. He's the guy from the Nazi black metal band Molot.
Yeah.
Also, the organizer of a metal festival in Kyiv that's quite big. And that's also where the members of the American Atomwaffen division were photographed. I think right at the Molot concert, and Joshua Caleb Sutter was among them. So I just want to also mention that someone made a comment critical of us on YouTube, saying how we are playing into satanic panic by shitting on metal, which is not true.
We like metal. I like metal.
I have nothing against metal. I've listened to metal bands since I was a kid. Also, nothing against black metal specifically. But there's just a fact. There is a small part of the black metal scene that's like Nazi oriented, and that was kind of subculture that was used to spread these bad ideas, especially in the 90s. So that's why we mention it, not because we have anything against metal. Yeah. But Levkin, I don't know if you want to tell us more about him.
Yeah, I mean, look, I used to listen to metal as well when I was in high school, and I mean, the fact is, there's just a lot of, in Ukraine at least, there's a lot of National Socialist black metal groups.
Yeah.
I mean, I forget the other ones.
There's Druge or whatever, Hate Forest.
It's also important that Druge is from Kharkov, which is the city where Azov emerged from. So, I mean, Kharkov has this really big, powerful, has always had from the 2000s, very strong neo-Nazi black metal scene. And it's one and the same. I mean, there's not really, I know that in other countries, I remember one time I thought there's some kind of like Mexican Aztec, anti-imperialist black metal exists, but in Ukraine, I mean, black metal, it's neo-Nazi. I mean, it's not really. There was, I mean, I'll talk about Lovkin in a second, but I mean, another interesting case is there's the Misanthropic Division, which is basically this subsection of Azov, which is very, very extreme, and they support school shootings, they support Brenton Tarrant, blah, blah, blah. And they do lots of international outreach to recruit fighters in the West to fight for Azov. And they also, Peste Noire, the French black metal group, they support Misanthropic Division, like the lead singer and stuff. They've posed with Misanthropic Division flags and so on. Anyway, so I mean, there's that whole element.
They have that terrible music video, I think, which also has Azov in it feature. It's so bad.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It's almost like rap rock black metal. It's fucking terrible.
That sounds horrible.
It's totally unlistenable. I think I might have even tried to make you listen to it, Ray, once on the show, but you might have blocked that off rightfully from your memory.
Yeah, I mean, but yeah, so Lyovkin, he set up this group, Molot, it's kind of like, I don't even know how you pronounce it, because I mean, in the name, it has 8-8, so obviously Heil Hitler.
Molot, I guess, yeah.
Molot or something, yeah. Because I mean, it also means like Molot, which is a hammer.
Yeah.
And that's a common name. There was like a neo-Nazi group in Ukraine called like Hitler's Hammer. Oh no, it wasn't. It's some kind of white hammers. Anyway, but that's a classic sort of
hammer skins in the US too. Like they like hammers.
Yeah. I mean, it kind of brings to mind as well the Dnipropetrovsk maniacs as well.
Oh, right.
In the 2000s, where they like massive, the serial killers that kill people with hammers. But anyway, but that's probably maybe, I mean, whatever. But so he started off Molot in the early 2000s, and it became very, very popular. Yeah, I would say it must be the most popular black metal group in the Russian language world.
I mean, those concerts look massive, the ones that I've seen. I mean,
yeah, it's really popular. And I mean, it's also just he has really, really popular merch. So you'll see so many people. I mean, I haven't seen them in real life, but I mean, in photographs at least, so many young people wearing the classic hoodies with the Molot symbol. And it's in the classic black metal thing. It's got 8A, you can really see. And so you'll often see, just like Russian government arrests some kind of neo-Nazi youth or whatever, or a young, organization, and they always have the Molot hoodie every single time, basically. And I mean, I don't think they're like planting it on them. People just like it, and you can.
I saw one guy who had like a full Molot neck tattoo, like that goes up to his face and shit. So that's definitely not planted.
Yeah, no. People are really into it. I mean, I've listened to a lot of, well, not a lot of. I listened to the classic Molot songs, and I mean, they're very popular. It's all about war, and they also have lots of songs about the Holocaust and how it's really cool and gotta do it more and so on. And but I mean, Lyovkin. But back to Lyovkin, so he had this band, very popular. And then he was involved with this neo-Nazi group that murdered migrants. He was accused of this in 2006, but they couldn't let the charges stick, so he was released in 2007. And then they accused him again in 2010 of hate crimes, of like attacking Jewish cemeteries. And then he got put in forcible psychiatric rehabilitation in classic Brezhnev tactic. But I feel like with Lyovkin, it maybe might have been a good idea, although who knows, who might say. But like anyway, and then but then they let him out in a year. So I don't really know what the point of that was, because they let him out in a couple of months essentially. And then he just got back to his usual thing. And I believe he went to Ukraine in 2014. I believe, he went to Ukraine in 2014. So before Kanakian. But then Lyovkin became really good friends with Kanakian. They're kind of best friends, and they organize all these kind of crazy sort of mystical Hitler cult type of things. For example, Lyovkin started up a new National Socialist black metal group called Adolf Cult in 2013.
Okay.
And then Lyovkin and Kanakian, until 2021, they would organize these festivals called Heretic Fest every year, where there's like a black metal festival with people all over from Europe coming. And then there were like these mystery rituals where Kanakian would dress up as Lucifer, and he had like an altar of Hitler with candles around it. And you can see like photos of this and stuff, the way they do it. They do all these kind of Hitler birthday events and so on. But now Lyovkin has this event, I think it's called Yule Fest. I mean, honestly, I get the names confused sometimes because they have all these different things.
It's all like variations of the same thing too. Like
yeah. But I mean, Yule Fest, so Ukraine's official military, channel, Army Inform, they did a big interview with Lyovkin a couple months ago, and where he like advertises Yule Fest and how cool it is. And then the other thing, one thing about Lyovkin is he was one of the people who created Wotan-Jugend, which is this really important like neo-Nazi, I guess, blog. Essentially, they publish lots of more kind of philosophical things, essays about all these kind of mystical Satanist, paganist, blah blah people, also about Hitler, obviously, of course, all that kind of stuff. And and they glorify all these Timothy McVeigh and Breivik, and they translated Christchurch Massacre. A guy from the RDK translated it into Russian. This guy Skachkov, and then I found, this is mine. Usually I just rely on other stuff, but I did find one interesting thing, which is kind of the thing that I found, which is that in October 2025 there was a new Russian translation of the Christchurch Massacres manifesto by this really random tiny Telegram channel called what's it called? Owl, no, or Hawk. I think it's called Hawk. It had like 100 followers, and uses a symbol which is very similar to the RDK symbol. and it was reposted by, and apparently it contains a letter sent to what's his name, Brenton Tarrant, in prison by a Russian neo-Nazi, and apparently Tarrant's replied to it. So it's this kind of new expanded edition of the Christchurch Massacre. And I mean, and to continue on the Christchurch Massacre storyline, is that Lovkin loves the Christchurch Massacre. He wrote about it a lot, how cool it was, and supporting it and so on, translating his stuff. And then Lovkin is also the lecturer in terms of on ideological matters for Centuria, which is the youth paramilitary of Azov. I mentioned it before. Mm-hmm. And Centuria is really, really extreme. They have, quite a few thousand youth around Ukraine involved in these paramilitary organizations. But there was, for instance, in 2021, Centuria posted a photograph of their training exercises, and one of them, the young men with a gun, he had written the birthday of Brenton Tarrant, and I think the date of the Tarrant killing, and in the classic way where how Tarrant wrote with the white marker on his gun. So they posted that to the official thing of Centuria.
Wow.
Which is pretty crazy. And because there are obviously, Tarrant was in Ukraine in 2015. This is established by the official investigation. And according to the official investigation, his mother was convinced that he would be returning to Ukraine and before the killing. That's where she thought he was going, and she was convinced that it was Ukrainian neo-Nazis essentially involved somehow in what happened.
Because he also had some other connections to in Austria, right? He had
there was this recent podcast that talked about that, where he talks about the Austria connections, but honestly, I found that a little bit underwhelming. It's interesting. Right. It's good that he did that, but it's like, I don't know. I think there was some probably more interesting things to be said there. Anyway, who am I to say? But basically, my point being is that Lovkin has this role of really indoctrinating young people with this neo-Nazi terrorism, terrorist ideology. And and one last thing is that Lovkin with Wotan Jugend, they had a poem in 2019, and it said, "Shoot the black biomass, shoot the yellow protoplasm, shoot for Timothy McVeigh." So it's they have this classic misanthropic, all of society is biomass. And then I wrote an article about school shootings in Russia, because there've been a lot of school shootings in Russia past basically 5 years or so, and 5, 6, 7 years, and lots of them are, most of them really are proclaimed like neo-Nazis. They have swastikas on their clothes and so on. And then several of them in their manifestos, they've used the term biomass, and they're opposed to this sort of thing. So it's all, the ideology is all similar, the same.
So it seems that Nazi black metal in Ukraine is used also not strictly for subcultural purposes, but also for more it's connected with more intellectual strains of fascism. So one of the more prominent fascist intellectuals in Ukraine is Olena Semeniaka, who I think also comes from the black metal scene and makes a point of it. She has a whole theory of black metal, how it's a continuation of romantic nationalism from the 19th century and so. And she was I think working in concert with Lovkin when he was organizing that metal festival. At the same time, she would organize a a more intellectual fascist conference in the Reconquista Club in Kiev. So also Atomwaffen guys and Joshua Sutter were also photographed at some presentations with her, listening to her talk, and some other people. So I don't know if you can tell us more about her and all that connection.
Yeah, absolutely. So Semeniaka is a little bit interesting, because she actually didn't start off in the, strictly speaking, say neo-Nazi subculture in the way that Lovkin and Kanakian and so on, well, especially Lovkin, sort of the classic skinhead black metal neo-Nazi revolutionary organizations, the way they present themselves. Semeniaka wasn't from there. She still calls herself a traditionalist. She's really into Gina and all this kind of stuff. And and in the 2010s, actually, she wasn't in the same groups that the people that would later be in Azov were. She had her own group in Kiev with this, and it was called like, what was it called? It's like the Club of Traditionalists, I think it was called. It was just like this intellectual club. So there was no, and they were like anti-political action because they were traditionalists. And, they were anti. So they were even kind of opposed in a sense to the Maidan, because they didn't think that revolutions were good in general. I mean, obviously, when it won, they were supportive of it. But at the time, and they even sort of maneuvered a little bit to ally even somewhat with the Yanukovych government in a kind of back alleyway. They had a guy that was a representative in a Kiev council. Anyway, so that was her background. And then after 2014, she became the head coordinator of international contacts for the National Core Party, which is the political party of Azov. And then she organized this Reconquista, and then it was always very closely with Lyovkin. I mean, she always said that she and Lyovkin worked together very closely in this project, and it was just the project of coordinating with neo-Nazis around Europe, around the West, and it was with the Pact of Steel. I mean, basically, when Sata came to Ukraine in 2018, it was at a conference organized by Semeniaka called the Pact of Steel. You can see when Sata came with the Atomwaffen guys, and there are photographs of them and video, and the idea of Reconquista, as Semeniaka writes about it, and as other guys talk about it, is basically that the EU obviously is not good enough because it's too multicultural, and obviously we hate Russia as well, so we need to have a new third force, a classic third force type of idea, which would be Eastern and Central Europe kind of split off and create their based ethno whatever the fuck thing going on. It's actually been pretty unsuccessful. I mean, it is kind of successful. I mean, they have lots of weird neo-Nazi groups that come, but it's because technically their ideology is of a united Eastern and Central Europe. But the problem is that all of the Eastern and Central European nationalists really hate each other because of kind of territorial disputes, right? So like the Polish and the Ukrainian ones, they have lots of problems for obvious reasons. And obviously so do the Hungarians, even worse. So I mean, and theoretically these would be, and the Romanians as well. I mean, some of them do cooperate, but generally they have very, very powerful historical and territorial disputes, right? So it doesn't really work out for them to cooperate, but they more have, more like German and American and so on, neo-Nazis that come and they really love that stuff. The RDK also has set up a different, the German volunteer corps. I don't know if you guys have followed this much.
A little bit,
and that has lots of guys from, what's it called? Derwitsit or whatever the fuck it's called.
The Dritte Weg or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. The third, and they go to protests with RDK in Germany as well. So they have a very big political and also military connection now because they have their own military unit in the Ukrainian army now as well. Anyway, so
Lyovkin, they have their own conference now too, right? That's the Nations Europa, and that's that
Nations Europa. So that's what I was going is basically. So Semeniaka was really prominent until about 2022. And now you never really see Semeniaka anymore. She set up this publishing house called Plomin, and it publishes different, like Guénon, all this kind of stuff. She's really into Hélène de Benoit. And
I think she published Franco Freda, I think.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, she publishes all kinds of this sort of thing. And it's kind of very sort of hipster. I was looking at the people who subscribe to Plomin, and it's all just these kind of annoying Kiev, creative types and posting photos of their, Leon de Grelle memoirs in some kind of beautiful cafe, and it's really bizarre. But anyway, and it's very most of the followers seem to be women as well. I mean, nothing. I don't have anything to say about that. It's just an interesting observation. But anyway, but then Semeniaka seemed to sort of, you don't see her anymore. And then after the war began, it's really Lyovkin and the other RDK guys that are really at the forefront of international connection. So they were the really big guys at this Nation Europa conference at the end of 2025. And they do lots of other events as well. We have neo-Nazis from around Europe and so on come to Ukraine, to Lviv and so on. And then also, I was talking about, I wrote about this American recently. I wrote about this American neo-Nazi guy who claims to have been in Atomwaffen and the base. And now he's a Marine, and now he went to Ukraine to train with Azov. And he has a Substack. You can actually read his Substack. It's free, so you don't have to pay to read his articles, and which is very nice.
A relief.
But And he talks there about his experiences in Kiev because he's training with Azov just the past like 2 months, and he talks about how cool the RDK is and so on. But there's no mention of Semenyaka. He just thinks the RDK and stuff, and obviously, is really cool. So they're really but you also the other main international outreach I would say is the Misanthropic Division, just kind of it's not really a separate organization.
That's what I wanted to ask you. Like, can you tell me like what the fuck is it? Because I had problems understand because is it like a skinhead gang? Is it a Nazi paramilitary? Is it like a equivalent to Atomwaffen division, or is like some internet like propaganda project to reach out to like Western misanthropic fascists and connect them to Azov? What is it?
So Misanthropic Division, it's not. It has a manifesto that you can read from 2015, and they have obviously they have 14 points in this manifesto,
of course.
But it's pretty clear what it is there. It's just that our purpose is to gather support for Azov and right sector. But I mean, no one gets the right sector anymore. That's kind of a bit of an old story. I mean, it kind of exists, but I mean, it's not that exciting for neo-Nazis anymore. But so it's like just a subsection of Azov. There are people like it actually was. So it started up in 2013, in late 2013, during the Euromaidan protests, and that's when there were first photographs of people with Misanthropic Division flags and so on. And then they actually played a quite important role in the beginning of 2014. This was like late. Anyway, it was after the Euromaidan had taken power. So it was either like late February or March, maybe even April. But basically, these were kind of the first. Some people say these were like the first killings of the civil war in Ukraine, where basically two anti-Maidan, or some would call them pro-Russian, but whatever, depending on your proclivities, they were killed in Kharkiv, which is obviously also the base of Azov. And Misanthropic Division claimed responsibility for these killings. And these were kind of the first deaths in what would then become kind of this conflict, obviously, in eastern Ukraine. So they do exist, and then they even had some marches and stuff in 2016. There's a video of them doing a march on YouTube, but then they claim to sort of have dissolved themselves and so on. But they don't. I mean, But the thing is about them is it's not a separate organization. It's always just been a way to get support for Azov. And then, as always with neo-Nazis and stuff, it's also a merchandise operation. So they have there are two different things. There's Nordic Storm and then there's Runic Storm. And I was confused the two because they're also like the same. And they're also just basically, one of them's definitely the merchandise store for Misanthropic Division. And the other one is just friends with Misanthropic Division. But I mean, all of these people, they all like hang out together and they post photos together. And Misanthropic Division, people in the army, they love to wear Misanthropic Division patches, and it's cool, it's trendy, and lots of it's all like the same milieu. So Misanthropic Division guys, they're also really involved with Centuria, which is with Lyovkin, and they're also and then they also hang out with the Nord Storm guys, and then so Runic Storm is so Runic Storm. I was just confused this. So Runic Storm is the merchandise platform for Misanthropic Division. So you can look up Runic Storm and you'll see a bunch of Misanthropic Division. They have a whole section of Misanthropic Division patches and merchandise, and then just all kinds of other stuff. And where there's like school shooting glorification and all kinds of other stuff. And so Misanthropic Division is really they're like probably the most openly pro school shooting guys out there.
I mean, it's in their name. They're misanthropes.
Yeah. I mean, so they post stuff where they praise even school shootings in the U.S. whatever. I mean, it's kind of always a little bit ironic, but if it's in Russia, it's very, very obviously supportive of it. And an interesting kind of thing that this is throwing back to our previous discussion of like the evolution of neo-Nazis in Russia is that there's a term in the Russian neo-Nazi subculture called aktioner, which is like, it's funny if you try and like Google Translate a thing about this, it'll tell you it means shareholder, which is the official, like that's the normal use of this term. But in the Russian neo-Nazi subculture, it means people who commit violent acts as like a protest but basically it's like murders, right?
Like a lone
obviously,
wolf type thing, or
yeah, exactly. So like an actionnaire, it's like an actioner. That's how you can describe it. A person who does actions, as a in a lone wolf kind of way. And so originally this was used to talk about killing migrants and so on. But now they use it to talk about school shootings. So Misanthropic Division, when they talk about school shootings in the US, in Russia, they'll always call them like actionnaire. When it's this idea of this like accelerationist idea of you do a school shooting and you're destroying society and all this kind of shit or whatever. So that's Misanthropic Division. They do exist. They have a pretty big Telegram channel. It's got 20,000 subscribers, but they call it now Philanthropic Division. And they have because they claim to not exist. That's the thing. I mean, because they're really crazy, right? I mean, there was also a story in like Seth Hoff, the journalist, who in 2022 he wrote about a French neo-Nazi who fought in Ukraine, and he was kind of attracted through Misanthropic Division to fight in Ukraine. Then he died there. Also, Bellingcat has written quite a lot, like about the role of Misanthropic Division in attracting, really deranged Western neo-Nazis that are, all talking on social media about, doing mass shootings against immigrants and so on, and that they sort of come to Ukraine, so on. It's unclear what they actually do in Ukraine, but anyway. So they do exist. They do exist.
Okay. I want to ask you about the connection with intelligence agencies, but before that, can you tell us, like, what is, in your view, the MKU or the murder maniacs cult, whatever they are called? Like, what do you think they are, and their leader, Yegor Krasnov? And because they are like doing this extreme street violence against what they consider social marginal people, and they proclaimed openly that they are like inspired by the Order of Nine Angles ideology. They're in alliance with 764 and so on. But are they in some real way different from what the Russian neo-Nazis were doing even before? Like you talked about at the beginning of this interview, groups that probably never heard of the Order of Nine Angles.
So MKU. It's almost like it's kind of a bit of a joke to talk about it though, in a sense, because it's just so ridiculous, And I mean, MKU. Anyway, but I mean, so the MKU. I think also at this point, the MKU doesn't really exist anymore. I mean, there are people who commit acts of violence and they sign it as MKU. Maybe they exist. I mean, they sort of sometimes you see, but there are no Telegram channels, for instance, with MKU. Like there are, I've looked for them, but there are some it's just kids that share cool edits of the MKU leader, Krasnov, who they consider to be very attractive. He was actually also found to be a pedophile. Actually, he sexually abused his followers.
The least surprising thing.
I mean, he himself is pretty young, but that's also But they don't really exist anymore. Apart from, but they do. It's more of just the inspiration thing, and they did definitely play a significant role in the development. I would really say in the development of like terrorcore in general, and in the development of Terragram, and of that whole aesthetic, and in the development as well, really of 764 as well, because I mean the MKU emerged earlier. I mean, we can talk about the sort of history of the MKU. So I mean, MKU. This is kind of based on the autobiography that the head of MKU wrote in the Haters Handbook, which is this book that was published in 2023 and 2024 by the MKU, and it's like about their tactics and and it's the autobiography as well of the leader. One of probably the stupidest book I've ever read in my life. But like there's a whole section about how to find Hyperborea on a map, and like and it's written in like really terrible English, and it's and also a lot, and then like whole parts of it are just generated by ChatGPT, and then it's all this stuff about like we use FBI interrogation techniques, and then it's just this big ChatGPT thing, and then it's some big thing about how Stalin was Jewish. Anyway, whatever. It's crazy, but it's also apparently illegal now. This is also a weird kind of funny but sad, depressing thing where basically the United Kingdom, in the same court, like the same decision, they made illegal Palestine action and the MKU.
Oh, right.
So it was like this classic sort of shit coding case. This was last year. Anyway, so MKU in the autobiography, Krasnov, he's a young kid in Dnipropetrovsk, or Dnipro, which is a city in eastern Ukraine, pretty dark, scary place. That's where the Hammer murderers, quite famous guys, were back in the 2000s, where they murdered people with hammers and posted videos. But Krasnov was pretty young. He was into amphetamines, which is a classic drug for Ukrainian Russian youths, like sol, whatever, very bad for your health. And then he got really into tattoos and nationalism. And according to his biography, autobiography, he joined a nationalist youth paramilitary around 2017. And he said that the people, he doesn't name the paramilitary, but he says that the instructors were experienced nationalist fighters, veterans of the war in Ukraine. So I think this is quite obviously, this was the Nationalne Drużyny, which were it's like how do you even translate Drużyny? But it's like basically national paramilitary, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And this was Azov's paramilitary, which was set up in 2017, and it had branch in his city. And then this paramilitary in 2020 would become Centuria, which is Lovkin and all those guys. Anyway, but and then Krasnov, MKU guy, says he was in Nationalne Drużyny, but it wasn't radical enough for him because he wanted to just kill a lot of homeless people. So he set up his own group of like-minded young people, and they began, killing huge amounts of homeless people and posting the videos online. And they created this new kind of aesthetic where they had horrorcore music, and they had this black and white thing, and they had, jagged cuts between different things, and it created this whole new aesthetic. And it seems to have been really influential on the subsequent Telegram whole aesthetic, essentially, of this, grimy Eastern European. And you'll often see, for instance, so many school shooters now in the US, they'll use Cyrillic letters.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And they'll also use this kind of black and white thing. And they have the classic MKU. They also, like Krasnov would draw these pictures, and it's like my twisted childhood thoughts, and it's like black and white in a notebook, scribbled and scrawled. And then you see all these school shooters in the US, they always do it like this. And obviously it's not that the MKU is directing them. It's just that they're sitting on these fucking, social media, like these telegrams or these different other online platforms, which are constantly sharing either MKU content from back in the day or just stuff that's influenced by MKU. So anyways, MKU emerged in about 2017/18, did a lot of murders. And then Krasnov was arrested in 2020 for brandishing a knife in a shop. And then he went to prison. There was but by this time he'd also set up a lot of cells around Russia and Ukraine. And then there were some reports claiming that he was still in communication. It seemed like he did still have a phone for some time in prison, and he was still communicating while in prison. But he's no longer. He hasn't communicated for a very long time, since 2021 or so, really. There are some Ukrainian nationalists. Obviously, Ukrainian nationalists, they'll often say, it's more like the Ukrainian government or liberal Ukrainian media. They'll say that the MKU is like a Russian operation or whatever. But then Ukrainian nationalists, some of them will say either that, or they'll also say that Krasnov cooperated with the Ukrainian intelligence services to discredit the rest of us, of the nationalists. Classic story.
Yeah.
Because in fact, the Ukrainian nationalists, they have a very, very complicated relationship with the SBU, the Security Services of Ukraine. Very, very complicated relationship with them. Lots of cooperation, but also they're always, if you read nationalist, neo-Nazi Ukrainian telegrams, they're always predicting the SBU is going to put us all in jail, and they're going to crack down on us, and they're done with us, and so on. They've got a really complicated relationship going on there as well. There were lots of there are cases of weird, unexplained suicides or killings of prominent neo-Nazi figures, where it was probably something where the leaders of Azov with the SBU got rid of them for kind of some strange reason, and so on. So anyway, it's a whole weird, complicated thing going on there. But that's essentially the Krasnov story.
Can you tell us more about this intelligence connection, and how do all of the people that we talked about today connect to different intelligence agencies in your view?
Yeah, well, with RDK, it's not a secret. They're a unit in the main intelligence directorate.
I mean,
right,
Budanov showed up in the resurrection video with White Rex,
I mean, like
right?
Budanov has praised the RDK since its inception in 2022. He was like, they're so cool. I mean, at first he was trying to say that they're just independent Russian patriots, but we're not supporting them. But
Budanov is the
head
the
of
chief of staff now of Zelensky's.
Yeah, so he's now the chief of staff, but until this month, he was the head of the main intelligence directorate, and that's Ukraine's. It didn't used to be very influential. The main intelligence agency used to be the Security Services of Ukraine, the SBU. The SBU is still very influential, but before the SBU was the only kind of intelligence service that worth anything. But then after 2014, when there was the Euromaidan and so on, this is based on the Washington Post and New York Times articles. Basically, the CIA was really tired of the SBU because the SBU is really renowned for corruption and also being infiltrated by Russian spies, and they're still always constantly uncovering new Russian spies in the SBU, like in wartime, like last year, there was a big one and so on. So anyway, so then the CIA really poured its attention towards the GUR, which is the main intelligence directorate, and in particular, Kirill Budanov. At this point, Kirill Budanov was still in the SBU, but the CIA, they even gave him special medical treatment at the Walter Reed Academy in Maryland when he got injured in 2016. And then so he's always been like the CIA's chosen protege. And this is based on the New York Times and the Washington Post. It's not like, some kind of secret. And then in 2021, Zelensky appointed him head of the GUR, the main intelligence director. And then since then, Budanov has become this big, epic covert operation, so on guy, very popular now guy, according, he's very constantly in the media. I know people in Ukraine from the sort of whole football hooligan nationalist scene, or at least they used to be in that scene, and they say that Budanov did his studies in Odessa, and they say that Budanov was involved with the football hooligan scene there as a young man, which I think is entirely possible because, the neo-Nazis, they love Budanov in Ukraine because, the GUR has a bunch of different special ops units, and they're all insane neo-Nazis. There's Kraken, there's a bunch of them. And there was a case, 2024, when it seemed like Zelensky might dismiss Budanov, and the Ukraine's main association of football hooligans, they put out this big statement supporting him, and then all the other nationalist groups were like, we love Budanov. And there's also a big Azov neo-Nazi rap group called Nord Division. There's so many of these fucking names, man. It's so annoying. You got Nord Division, Misanthropic Division, Nordic Storm, Runic Storm, and they all hang out together. They're all the same guys. But Nord Division is a rap group, and they do like nationalist rap. It's mainly in Russian, actually. But and they have like a whole freestyle rap dedicated to Budanov. And they call him like Dr. Mengele, and like he's like our base Dr.
As a
Mengele,
positive thing, yeah.
As a positive thing, yeah, and like all kinds of other shit about like he blew up the Nord Stream and all that kind of shit. So anyway, so yeah, the RDK they work for him and they hang out with him all the time. And look, if you want to get really speculative, I don't know if you want to, but whatever. But like Budanov, he talks in his interviews about how it's necessary, like because he did all these different drone attacks, for example, inside Russia. Not like the big classic ones last year, but other different kinds of, and just different weird, covert operations in Russia. And also, this was an interview about why did the RDK go into southern Russia, right, into Belgorod in 2023. And Budanov says that the Russian population supports Putin because Putin gives them security. And we need to remove this idea from them. We need to, so that Russian people feel like there's no more security in Russia. Mm-hmm. And that's his perspective for why it's important to do these operations. And then, if you start thinking about it, with all these different, neo-Nazis that he has working for him, and their whole kind of ideology of, right-wing accelerationism, right, of destabilizing society, and the way that, Kapustin calls it a rehowa, right, where it's like
racial holy war,
yeah, racial holy war. And then obviously because the Russian government media, they'll say that like these guys are basically convincing kids to do school shootings. I don't know how real that is. It's kind of impossible to say, but I think at minimum, the kids that do school shootings, they are influenced by this content online, and I don't really think it's. I mean, it might be, but like I think often it's not. It's generally not someone telling them to do it, but it's just that they're sitting in these online spaces.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I mean, you can see some kind of logic there in that sense.
Yeah.
Because I mean, it is also. I mean, there haven't been any school shootings in Ukraine. I mean, there was one kind of attempted knifing recently, but that was a weird story. That's what it seemed. But in Russia, like the past 6-7 years, there didn't used to be any at all. But then all of a sudden, there are all these huge school shootings. There was one in 2023 in the Bryansk region, which is one of the areas actually that RDK went into in southern Russia. And there was this girl, and she shot a couple of, I think she killed one other student and herself and injured some others. And her father told the media that she had been talking with MKU people on the internet for a few months before that. And I mean, obviously, whatever, maybe it's not true, but I mean, it does kind of sound logical. I mean, but anyway, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I feel like those kinds of things take on a life of their own, and
exactly.
If it ends up benefiting an intelligence service or not, it seems to be like a happy coincidence.
Exactly. I mean, I don't think that it's obviously. I don't think that it's say Budanov saying,
"Yeah, we need more school shootings in Russia." Yeah.
No, it's not like that. It's just that he employs a bunch of people who are totally deranged, and there are people among them that are pro school shootings. And they do it. They talk about it on social media and so on. And they are trying to recruit people in Russia to fight with them in the RDK to come to Ukraine or to do terrorist acts. Well, how you want to call it. I mean, like, throwing Molotov cocktails at military things, whatever. I mean, however you want to call that, but trying basically like partisan warfare inside of Russia. The RDK often writes about this, and they give instructions on how to do it and so on. And then, I mean, this is a group we haven't really talked about today, but this is actually a pretty influential group. NSWP. It's like National Socialism, White Power. And this was actually a forum in the early 2000s, really influential in the sort of, neo-Nazi scene in Russia. And they are often credited with being kind of one of the forces in the misanthropization, I guess, of Russian Nazi subculture, where they were it's not really an organization, though. It's just like, it's kind of like ISIS, where people can just claim this term for themselves and set up a cell. It was originally a forum, but anyway, NSWP people, they for instance, they did like a competition in 2018 to kill the most homeless people on camera, and the winner gets a white iPhone. Like, they were doing stuff like that. And then like after 2022, and then one of their important figures came to Ukraine, Zheleznov. And then after 2022, NSWP was advertising on their Telegram monetary rewards for Molotov cocktails against military administration and stuff like this. And then there's been since different court recordings recently, and like youth that were arrested for involvement in this stuff with NSWP. They say that they weren't aware at the time that the person in charge of NSWP was in Ukraine, Zheleznov, and that it was also the intelligence agencies, Ukrainian intelligence agencies, involved with this. And they were tricked into getting involved with this, and now they have like a 10-year prison sentence, because in Russia it's very, very strict, right? Obviously, if you're doing these kinds of things. So that's a whole other element of it, where it's also like, where are they getting the money to have these big financial rewards for doing this?
Right.
NSWP portrayed itself as being opposed to both Russia and Ukraine, obviously, because I mean, in the attempt to get, followers in Russia. But then in like the court transcripts, the people involved, they were like, we were tricked, because in reality, I mean, the guys there are just Azov guys, essentially. So, yeah.
So, Russian esoteric fascist publisher called Totenberg, I think, from what I understand, they claim themselves they have a connection with the Temple of the Black Sun, which is the Nexion of the Order of Nine Angles in Russia that we mentioned before. But they're also connected to and supported by some Russian nationalists, including some who fight on the Russian side of the war. Is that correct?
Yeah. So Totenberg, it's basically affiliated with this other publisher that existed before called X Nord Logs, and they publish, and like Exmodlux is followed by Kanachin. There's no specific connection between Temple of the Black Sun and Totenberg, apart from the fact that Kanachin is subscribed to Exmodlux, which is the same thing basically, but run by the same person basically. But Totenberg does post photographs of their like esoteric ritual stone arrangements and like in the Kola Peninsula. So, and in a very similar style to the photographs in Kiss of Marina. It looks almost indistinguishable. And I'm looking at one right now where they have some driftwood arranged into a swastika on top of some rocks and so on. Yeah, and then Totenberg publishes a lot of stuff, all these kind of esoteric neo-Nazi stuff, but then they also publish recollections from Russians fighting in the Russian army in Donbass and so on. And yeah, I mean, it's not surprising. I listen to Natsball media sometimes. I find it kind of interesting. See, the Natsballs in the 2000s, it's kind of an interesting thing. Limona is a very interesting personality. My family actually knew Limona in the same city in Kharkiv. And I like his books are really entertaining. But I mean, the Natsballs have gone through many evolutions. And anyway, but now they seem to be very much more kind of, I guess, just classically fascist, I suppose. And I listen to them and they just talk about Younger all the time. And they talk about Evola. They're really into Evola. Okay. Everyone's into Evola now. Everyone's just in Evola. So different shades of Evolanism, I suppose. And so Totenberg is kind of in that where they and they are defended by different other prominent right-wing publishers. Right-wing is a kind of soft term for in Russia that are sort of on the side of the government. But I guess what is worth pointing out here is that Russian white nationalist forces, they have a very complicated relationship with the government because, I mean, they do like the idea of being patriotic and killing our enemies and so on, and especially, killing Muslims and so on. They're really into that. So that they're, with the Chechen war and so on. But they also have a very complicated time with the government because the government is pro-immigration. The government often imprisons their people. Recently had this case of the biggest Russian white nationalist neo-Nazi military organization, Española, which was mainly staffed by Russian football hooligans with white national, and they all were white nationalists and so on. And it was recently disbanded, and the leader was killed by the Russian police. This happened 2 months ago. Yeah, and Rusich was really sad. Everyone was really sad. But that's kind of the classic position of the Russian nationalists, where it's like they can serve the government, but they're also kind of at risk of getting killed. Because these are kind of not really trustable elements because they have so many links with Ukraine as well. I mean, I read an article recently where it's like all of these Russian patriotic MMA groups and so on that claim to be very pro-Russian government, but they constantly turn out to they're organizing some kind of event where they're propagandizing Azov. Essentially, they have Azov symbols and so on. They have Azov, and then they have people that get drunk and they start yelling about how much they love Azov, and they go to prison. Or whatever. So I mean, or some of them, where they just go and fight with Ukraine, even though they're originally from this kind of patriotic Russian subculture. So it's complicated because really, ultimately, Ukraine is more attractive for them because there's more freedom for them to do what they want to do in Ukraine. They don't have to hide their symbols. They don't have to, do whatever else. Or at least they don't have to hide them. They can hide them less because they can still show them a bit in Russia, especially if they have some clout. But still, I mean, and there's still less power ultimately. You said Azov is huge now. I mean, as I was saying, we were saying RDK is a small unit. It is a small unit, but Azov, I mean, the Third Army Corps is under the leadership of Beletsky, whose nickname is the White Führer. Right. It has 50,000 men, according to the Times. So it's huge, and it's constantly growing. And Beletsky's whole aim is to take control of the entire army. And people are talking about, he could be the next, commander in chief of the army. And it's definitely a very, very real possibility. Definitely in the top 3 possible replacements. So yeah.
Okay. My last question is about Prigozhin and his attempted mutiny. So when that happened, it seemed to me there were signals that Prigozhin was sending towards, people like the Russian Volunteer Corps and Azov of some possible even friendship. I mean, I remember him saying how it's kind of a propagandist lie that these people are neo-Nazis. It's not true. We are not fighting against neo-Nazis, if I remember correctly. And then from the other side, there was also some support, like coming from Azov and Russian Volunteer Corps people for the mutiny itself. And when that was happening, I was like, "Holy shit! Will Azov and Wagner kind of unite, and we'll have like a third side in this war, like Nazis against Jews of Kiev and Moscow or something like that?" Of course, it didn't happen. But should things like that, do they still go on? And should they be understood in the context of what we are talking about today? I don't mean the Satanist thing, but I mean the whole kind of nihilist view of war, support of war as such, and the Viking warriors, whatever side they are fighting on, and so on, which is essentially also kind of a nihilist misanthropic view, no?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Wagner, they had the slogan of our business is death, and business is going well, and they had blood, honor, motherland, and whatever the fuck else. But so yeah, they had the whole nihilist violence thing going on very well. Obviously, blood and honor is the Hitler Jugend, I think, slogan or whatever. But anyway, the whole Wagner, Prigozhin, what a topic, best topic. We can have a whole podcast about that. But essentially, yes, the leaders of the RDK, they supported the Prigozhin uprising. There was also this media, they were like, what was it? I think it was originally there were these weird leaks, and then the Washington Post reported on it, and then Budanov kind of hinted at it, which is basically that Budanov was apparently communicating with Prigozhin in the months before the uprising, where and Budanov is the head of the military intelligence, the leader of the employer of RDK and so on, and where apparently it was like they agreed that Ukrainian army would not attack in some areas where Prigozhin is, and then Prigozhin would give them some kind of information or some other sort of shit. And because Prigozhin was in this big conflict with the official Russian army at the time, and Prigozhin denied it and so on. But there were these reports, and ultimately, come on, the guy does an uprising during, and this was right after Ukraine's counteroffensive began, right? It seems like something that's not. Well, obviously, the Ukrainian government would be interested in that, and Western governments would be interested in that. There's not really any other way around it. And then I think, you can definitely see how, in Wagner, you had lots of people from the football hooligan neo-Nazi scene that joined Wagner. Yeah, mainly because it was, because Rusich was originally with Wagner. They have and they were together in Syria as well, and they have a long history of cooperation together. The head of Rusich, Milchakov, he also supported the Wagner uprising. So I think, there were definitely lots of back channels for communication between them, because these are people from the same subculture. Like I was saying, with the leader of Rusich, he was best friends with these, Ukrainian, Russian neo-Nazi that went to Ukraine. Right. And there were so many opportunities for communication there. In terms of alliance, I definitely think they wouldn't. It's like with the Jews thing, I don't think either of them care about Jews, ultimately. It's not really. Not the.
Well, Prigozhin was Jewish, no?
Prigozhin was Jewish, exactly. Yeah. And the leader of the RDK is Jewish as well. And then also you have like the right now the main sponsors of the RDK are these two Russian Jewish oligarchs, Khodorkovsky and Nevzlin. Nevzlin lives in Israel, and he's like really fanatically supporting the RDK against the rest of the Russian opposition. Anyway, that's a whole other weird story. But I don't think that the Jewish question is really that significant at all for contemporary Russian, Ukrainian neo-Nazis. I think in lots of the world, I don't think they care that much about Jews anyway. I know what you mean, though, in terms of against the government.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think.
They still utilize this anti-Semitic rhetoric.
Sometimes. Yeah, at least in Ukraine, I think not really. I think in Russia, sometimes maybe a little bit more, because, anyway, but in Ukraine, I don't care that much about it. There's a funny thing where the head ideologist of RDK, Vasil Gidashenko, he knows Zelensky because his father was the director of Seven of the People, the TV show that made Zelensky into president. And he's a really influential, Russian, well, not really influential, but he was a Russian director and actor, and he directed Zelensky's TV show, Seven of the People. But anyway, his son is the head ideologist of RDK. And his son said that Zelensky is a good guy. He's not with Zog.
Damn.
So there you go. He said Zhid, whatever.
Same thing, yeah.
Yeah. But So yeah, Wagner, and then I mean, since after that, lots of top Azov fighters in interviews, they'll say how much they respect Wagner and how Wagner was the only true opponent they ever faced, and how they learn a lot from Wagner, and especially in terms of like recruiting prisoners. Like they try to recruit prisoners, and this guy, the Azov guy, says that he watches videos of Prigozhin to hype him up with the famous videos of Prigozhin when he'd go to the prisons and recruit people. And the Azov guy says in the interview that this is what I watch to hype myself up. And in general, the whole sort of, this whole culture of very harsh discipline, obviously towards your own subordinates, and this idea of very strong coordination and very high level of organization, and all this kind of shit they love talking about. And the cult of death and all this kind of thing. So yeah, and then as I was saying, there are the RDK. They often make a point about how they have a lot of ex-Wagner fighters in the RDK, and in like big in Azov's main YouTube channel, which has like a 500,000 subscribers. They do lots of videos with the RDK, and they'll often talk there about that. They'll bring up their ex-Wagner fighters and they'll interview them. So yeah.
So I wanted to ask quickly. I mean, we talked a little bit about how some of these Russians that go over to the Ukrainian side do so because they have more freedom to do this kind of white power stuff, and that this is still kind of a tension that goes on with some of the Nazis in Russia. What do you know about these groups now that are kind of seem to be maybe some sort of controlled opposition fascism, like Ruskaya Община and like the what's it called, the Double-Headed Eagle, and some of these groups that are in Russia that are taking this kind of more orthodox clero-fascist approach? Is that an attempt to kind of separate those two scenes, like kind of make a more just explicitly orthodox clero-fascist scene that's more government controlled, or is it kind of the same people ultimately?
Yeah, so Ruskaya Общina, Russian, let's just call it like Russian community, which is what it means. It seems to be largely controlled by the FSB, by like the the Federal Security, whatever, the ex-KGB, I guess.
Yeah.
And then Double-Headed Eagle is controlled by Konstantin Malafeyev, who's this Russian Orthodox oligarch, blah, 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 blah. And they actually have a bit of a conflict going on, these two forces. And I've written a lot about Malafeyev in my blog. I found him a very interesting figure. You have a lot of scandals as well with with both of these, but especially with Malafeyev's Double-Headed Eagle, where their forces, like people in this organization, will turn out to be like pro-Ukrainian or just generally just neo-Nazis that commit murders of homeless people. There was last year, there was an MMA trainer in Malafeyev's Double-Headed Eagle was arrested for encouraging and helping the kids he was training to kill homeless people and so on. Yeah. And on camera. And then also there was like other weird, like Azov, blah, blah. Yeah, obviously it's this attempt to, the channel anti-migrant sentiment, generally kind of nationalist oppositional sentiment. Because you can tell, I mean, the Russian government is worried as well that, you have a lot of young people that are really into neo-Nazi stuff, and they don't want them to go, to support Ukraine, obviously, because you have this constant propaganda push by RDK guys that, Russia is a, Zog and it's multinational, blah, blah, real, white warriors fight with the RDK, and, and these kids are, they love Moloch and so on. So there's that. So I think there's, competing, I guess, psyops going on. I mean, and the Ruskaya Общina, they have, in the interviews, they talk about how they have like political ambitions. They want to go into government, or they want to go in elections, and they're probably, there's meant to be elections at some point soon, obviously in Russia, or whatever you can say about elections. But I mean, things do still happen there. I mean, it's different to what maybe in the West is an election, and obviously, but there still is competition over these seats, right? It's just in a more,
limited.
Well, yeah, it's just a little bit less, maybe less transparent. I don't know how you describe it, but basically, but yeah, so that there will probably be a new nationalist force or party or something, and Ruskaya Общina is going to be with that. But they seem to, they focus a lot more on, like attacking migrants and so on, or like working with the police. But then there are reports from like Meduza, which is the anti-Putin liberal opposition media, and they talk about how lots of the Russian police is also kind of not really too happy with the Ruskaya Общina because they think that it's really destabilizing public order. And there was even a statement quite recently by one of the top-ranking Russian security officials, and he was talking about how he doesn't think Ruskaya Общina is a good idea because it is destabilizing for Russia's fragile ethnic politics, right? And then double-headed eagle, yeah, it exists, but there is a lot of Malafeyev, there are top politicians in Russia that really criticize Malafeyev, and this is a whole topic. But basically, that they sort of, there are senators in the Russian Duma from Putin's United Russia Party. This one guy, Oleg Matveyev, and some other guys, where they say that Malafeyev is a CIA agent, basically, who's destabilizing Russia through this insane nationalism and tarring Russia's image and dragging Russia into Donbass in 2014, which they think was unnecessary. They should have just focused on Crimea. And then Malafeyev dragged them into Donbass, and that was what the CIA did with Afghanistan.
Okay, so that's the theory, huh?
That's the theory, which is kind of a cool theory, I mean. And I mean, Malafeyev he's this whole Orthodox blah blah guy, but
fascinating figure. It's really
he's a
weird,
fascinating figure. I mean, I've really enjoyed writing articles about him because he started his career working for this big American financial capital banking group in Moscow, in St. Petersburg or something in the 90s, and then his big allies are the Chavchavadze family, and they fought with Hitler, right, in the 40s, and they also fought in interviews from a figure in the Chavchavadze family. He talks about how he, as part of the Russian the ROA, the Vlasov army, they also fought along with the Banderites in Slovakia. So it's but then they went to the US, this family, and they became really influential with the Russian Orthodox Church abroad, which was basically like a white emigre / CIA front.
Oh yeah, we've talked about ROCOR before on the show.
Yeah, and they were also involved with the foundation of Radio Svoboda, like the Radio Free Europe for Russia, which is also just a straight up CIA cutout, right?
Yeah.
And then they came back to Russia in the 90s, this family, the Chavchavadze family, and they said he had this statement because they got really involved with, this is also the Jordan family, another similar family, and they also fought with the White Army and then with Hitler in the 40s, and then they went to the US. And then they came back, and he was really important. Like Jordan, what's his name? Boris Jordan. He was one of the most prominent privatizers of the 90s, really hardcore, liberal shock therapy. And he said that he considers shock therapy to be waging the same war that my father and grandfather did. And I mean, his grandfather was the White Army, and his father was Nazi, with Hitler, right? Yeah. So, but this guy got Malafeyev his job. This was Malafeyev's the main guy that got Malafeyev into business to begin with. And then the Chavchavadze family, who's also basically the same sort of shit, who came back, and they're more like ROCOR, whatever. I mean, they're all like ROCOR guys, and they run the charity organizations that Malafeyev does. But anyway, my point just being is that, all of his friends are mega sus,
Right. Sure.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, if you look at what this guy is saying and doing, I mean, this guy it's so retrograde, I mean, he's so archaic, and I mean, and you can say what you will about Russian sort of, but there is this older kind of Russian elite that's kind of the late Soviet, the kind of these, bureaucratic rationalists or whatever, and I really don't think they fuck with Malafeyev's vibe, and you can see when you hear what they're talking about. I think sometimes they can sort of they want to manipulate it. They want to manipulate these ideas for their benefit, but ultimately, I do think they see it as very destabilizing, and that's why you have this kind of sorry fate of many of these Russian white nationalists, where they get used for a period of time by the government, but then they end up in jail or killed.
Right,
or not, but
or not
sometimes.
Well, I could. Okay, so I guess we're kind of running out of time here. But because we're actually running out of space here on our little mixer as well. But obviously, we could keep going on forever and ever, and I'd like to have you on the show again sometime. Because we didn't even get to. I wanted to talk to you about Avantgardia, because they're kind of my pet Ukrainian Nazis, because they're just the ultimate hipster Nazis. But I guess they'll have to wait for another time, and we can definitely talk more about Malafeyev and the like. But this has been really great, Peter.
Yes.
I really, any of the topics that we talked about today, you can read about in a lot more detail on Events in Ukraine Substack. So definitely go there and check out more of this, because it's there's so much. I mean, you're really prolific writer, man. You're pumping that stuff out. It's amazing.
Thanks a lot, guys. I really enjoy it, even though, I mean, sometimes I don't enjoy it, but I do enjoy it. I mean, when you're talking about MKU and but somehow it's still interesting. So
yeah. Thank you a lot. This is great.
Thanks so much, guys. I'm so happy to be on here.
All awesome, man.
Yep.
See you later. And thanks everybody for subscribing and all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Ray here. I had a dream, and it was that I won't be working in call centers anymore. And you can help that dream become a reality by going to patreon.com and subscribing. And if you're German, or Austrian, or Anti-Deutsch, whatever you people call yourselves these days, doesn't really matter. The fact is, your grandfather killed my grandfather. He marched down the street in my hometown, renamed the square fucking Adolf Hitler Square. You think I'm kidding? All of this actually happened. And you should feel bad about it. I don't care if you were born in 97 or wherever you were born. This is not normal behavior, okay? You're not normal. I know people from all of the continents, no one thinks you're normal. But there's good news for you. We made a special tier just for you, so you can pay 10 times as much as a normal person would. It won't make you normal, but it will make you feel better. Okay, thanks. Bye.